This is Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. All right, everybody. Hey, welcome to another episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. I'm here with Joel Triska tonight, and we are bringing you a very special interview. We've interviewed several people in season 3 of our podcast, and so tonight we are going to treat you to an interview with a lady named Miriam Thompson, and we have a very interesting conversation. We talked quite a bit about her essay, The Courage to Disagree in Academia. Joel, would you say a few words to introduce us to Dr. Miriam Thompson?
Absolutely. So Dr. Miriam Thompson is a tenured professor at UC Santa Barbara. She is an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Counseling. She earned her Ph.D. from University of Arizona in school psychology. And so she oversees a clinic there. She is faculty, teaches classes, oversees clinics that do assessments for the mind and various assessments that people need in this day and age. And she has a real passion in the areas of diversity and multiculturalism, child and adolescent psychopathology, and specific learning disorders. So we'll get to hear a little bit of her story, but what we're really going to be digging into is some of her particular views around academia and free speech.
Well said, comrade.
All right, well, let's jump into it.
Okay.
Let's act like we're going to jump, and then we'll go into it. Ready?
Yeah!
Well, hello, everyone. Here we are with Dr. Miriam Thompson, and we're excited to jump into this conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit about an article that she wrote, but before we get there, Miriam, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your educational journey?
Absolutely. So I grew up in California. So I'm a California girl, born and raised. I spent a little bit of time, quite a bit of time outside of the state, but I was born in Woodland, California, which is near Davis, near Sacramento. And then I spent the majority of my childhood in San Diego County, in Vista specifically. And so I've just been very familiar with the California lifestyle and the weather, definitely. And spent some time in Savannah, Georgia. So for 3 years during my high school age years, where my father, we moved there because my father got a job.
Awesome. And what was kind of your journey educationally after high school?
So after high school, I immediately went to the University of Arizona. And it's interesting because I chose the University of Arizona. I mean, my dad graduated from the University of Arizona, but specifically they have a program for people with learning and attention challenges. And this isn't something I talk about a lot, but I was a child that had a learning disability, and I've been able to overcome a lot of it now. What people see today is the finished product. I am a tenured professor at UC Santa Barbara. I direct an assessment clinic and I write a lot, but no one would know like the hidden challenges that I had to overcome to get to where I'm at today. But the SALT Center is the program that they have at the University of Arizona, where they provide specialized support for college students with learning and attention challenges.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Miriam.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Well, so we're gonna let you kind of dish on the essay or article that Joel and I read that we really enjoyed. Courage to Disagree in Academia. We're gonna put you on the spot, but I want to ask you, because of that article, it's clear that you have expertise. You've spent a lot of time thinking about academic expression. Joel and I sometimes will have in our conversations we'll talk about generational divides or just generational differences. What's happening in cultural trends. Are there things in that are happening in with your pulse, finger on the pulse? Are there trends that are happening in the area of academic expression that are either making you optimistic or cynical? If you can say anything about those things.
Yes. Okay. I'll start with the cynical part. I, I
Maybe
just
that's
have
good.
to.
Yeah, give us the bad news.
I have to start. So with the cynical part, I just grow kind of weary of people, and it's not everyone, just some students being stuck in this world of idealism where we all can all
Hmm.
hold hands, everybody is going to be equal or equitable. That is certainly ideal, and that would be a beautiful world to live in. And so what I've observed is people operating and acting in ways where that is an achievable reality. And I don't want to be pessimistic or cynical as I am right now, but that's just not possible. I'm just really focused on what is attainable, what's realistic, and what
Hmm.
we can achieve. And so when we're talking about, making college free, I mean, we just don't live in that country where college can be free, and that would totally be so cool. Like I would love that. I would
Hmm.
love that, but we just don't have like the history. We don't have the type of government where that can be made possible. I do think education, I mean, it goes back, is education a privilege or a right, and who should pay for it? I come from a family where both my parents have terminal degrees. My mother is a physician. My father was a political scientist and worked in administration.
Hmm.
So I come from a background of highly educated people, but that it's a value of mine. But that's just kind of an example. And then in terms of, forgot the other question.
Well, just optimistic or cynical
Optimistic.
for academic expression.
Well, I'm really optimistic with just the new generation. Of course, there's challenges with every generation that you come across. And then you always look at the older generation. Well, we had it tougher, but they're open to learning. And they get such a bad rap. And I really am hopeful because I taught a class, the psychology of ideas and beliefs, to incoming freshmen, and they were all so open to the range of controversial topics that we discussed. That made me so optimistic that we can open new ideas to incoming students and the youth. Like they are definitely open.
That's actually good to hear. Yeah, I definitely hear kind of both sides of the coin. The idealism, I'm curious where that might be coming from generationally. But we've been teeing this up and teasing it out. This article you wrote that caught my attention. So, you spoiler alert. We're just kind of going behind the curtains a bit. I know you because my wife works in similar fields as you, and she obviously knows Trent and my podcast, and she read this article that you wrote, and she said, "Joel, I think you would love this," and she sent it to me, and I did love it. You wrote this article, "The Courage to Disagree in Academia," which was published in the Journal of Free Black Thought. So give us an idea of what experiences and or perspectives led you to write this.
Yes. So I think it's just been a culmination of experiences and just heavy consumption of the literature. There's so many examples that I can provide to you, but I'll start with one and then we can just go there. So as an academic, I have an opportunity to read manuscripts, and these manuscripts are evaluated, go through a mass peer review process. So when you see this is a peer reviewed article, so it's been reviewed by people who are in the field. And so just a trend that I notice is that there's just such a deficit perspective in terms of the experiences of, Black people or other people of color. And it always goes to, well, white supremacy is the cause for this particular issue, like a child's, challenges in attaining, academic success in the classroom. But I come from the school of thought, well, there's a different way to approach the issue. And one is through the lens of empowerment. What can you do? What can parents do? And so I just found that when I was reviewing manuscripts, that the other side of the issue was always missing. It was very deficit minded. It was really looking at, white supremacy, which obviously is real, but it's, lurking behind every corner and it's out at you. And it was such just an easy way to talk about an issue that is, huge. For example, why are there differences in academic achievement between Black students and white students? I mean, it's much bigger than, it's racism. I mean, that could certainly be the part, but I think it's just too easy to say that, to challenge yourself and to look at other issues. What about parental involvement? Are parents there sitting with their kids, helping them with their homework? That and things like that, issues like that just weren't being discussed. And so that's one reason that one of the many reasons that kind of motivated me to write this.
That's powerful. And Trent, before you jump into your question, it made me think
Sure.
of, both Trent and I grew up in rather fundamentalist kinds of religion. And I grew up in a tradition that loved to blame everything on the devil. And, and whatever anyone thinks about, whether the devil's real or not, the truth was it kept us from looking at other causes, other roots, things that I could actually address. I'm not like a victim of spiritual forces, but I'm, to use your word, empowered to explore how other tools, resources that might help me find success. So that's kind of like what cropped into my mind. Well, white supremacy and racism is behind every corner and the devil's hiding in every bush. That's what it made me think of.
That's such a great analogy, Joel. And it reminds me of this book by John McWhorter called Woke Racism. And he talks about how, woke racism, or like really the anti-racism movement, is really the gospel. And if you question the gospel, then, there's something wrong with you, kind of from your line of thinking, you're going to hell. You cannot question the good word. And you certainly can't question it if it's coming from a person of color. You can't question, if they like their experiences. And it's fine to ask questions. It's not somebody that I'm not diminishing your experiences. It's important to ask critical questions. And it's important to disagree. It's such an important cornerstone of academia. And I find it being, I find so many people taking such personal offense when a question is asked.
Miriam, one of the phrases that and concepts that really caught my attention in your essay was when you talk about does impact matter more than intent? And when I first came across that phrase, I wasn't quite sure what you were talking about, and then I read further, and then I realized what you were talking about. But could you illuminate that for people when it comes to this particular discussion of academic freedom and freedom of expression? What do you mean by, from your perspective, intent mattering more than impact? What do you mean by it, and why is that an important distinction to make for people?
It's such an important distinction to make. I mean, I will say that being a former DEI officer and being in the world of diversity training and having taught a diversity course, I was really indoctrinated and really trained to believe that impact matters more than intent. And what that means is, let's just say you call someone by the wrong name, like their actual name, or you call someone by the wrong pronoun, for example. Well, the impact that mistake had matters than the intent. You were well intended. But here's the thing, we're people and we make mistakes. We're going to goof up. It just happens. But that doesn't mean that we're these, horrible people. And what ends up happening is we end up going down this, we end up spiraling and end up, self-flagellating. And it's a terrible thing. I think there was an instance in a classroom where I think I said, preferred pronouns, and someone corrected me, provided me feedback, and I accepted it. But I learned from it and I moved on, but my intent was good. And so, but we've used it to generalize, and it's become like a massive overcorrection where if you, again, use someone's, wrong name or you call someone by the wrong pronoun, you're homophobic or you're transphobic. But in a field like the social sciences, terms are changing constantly. For example, the term, BIPOC, I think came and went. Maybe it's here to stay. I don't know. But it's hard to keep up with all of the changing terms. And, we're going from, homelessness or unhoused. I mean, have you ever asked someone who is homeless or unhoused how they wish to be referred? I mean, so obviously it's well intended, but if I call someone, refer to someone as homeless, I am concerned about the plight of people who are transient, who don't have stable housing. But I think we just lose ourselves in the minutia. And I mean, what are we really trying to accomplish? We're here to do greater good, and we get lost in it. And so really, that's what I mean. Let's give each other some grace. But if someone is establishing a pattern of offenses, then clearly their intent is malignant, and the impact is horrible. But I feel like we could be reasonable here.
I love that you're saying that. Go ahead, Trent.
Okay, I just want to follow on. I want to share like a quick anecdote because I think it relates to this. Because one of the things you talk about, Miriam, is you talk about how if we become too stringent with each other and too um in too incriminating, and we're so strict, like people aren't going to want to take relational risks anymore. It might just be easier to say, I don't want to talk to you or you or you because I'm afraid that I might do something where there's irreparable damage. And let me just share. I'll share this quick story to illuminate it. But like um, about a week or so ago, I got into an Uber, and it was a black gentleman who was driving the car, and he had country music playing. And I remember I was thinking, and then this reveals what's going on, right? I was thinking to myself, is he playing that to make me feel comfortable? Or am I a jerk for thinking that maybe he genuinely likes that music, right? And then a number of years ago, I was driving for Uber. And I would have people people from all kinds of different cultures and different colors and whatever in the back of my car. And I would sometimes tweak the music just because I'd be like, well, if I've got country music playing, are they going to think I'm a racist? And then if I put like, I've got like a Bone Thugs and Harmony song from the 90s. Like if I have that on, are they going to think I'm cultural appropriating? And I just like, I don't know what to do. And again, and it's not the problem out there. The problem is with me too, because I'm making a lot of assumptions about people that may not be true at all. But I feel like that story is a little bit reflective of kind of where we are. Is we're all a little bit afraid of each other because we're not sure what we can do, rather than maybe being in a world where people would be willing to tell each other, hey, that offends me, or I don't like that, or would you be willing to do this? And here I was walking on eggshells.
That's such a great example. I think what you kind of shared shows just like we become so hyper politically correct, and we should be respectful, but we're thinking way too hard about some of these things.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And we've talked a little bit about this on one of our other podcasts. We called it Devilish Advocates. And we were talking about bad ways of doing good. Like in almost all these cases, I am for the cause.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not a big fan of how we're going about creating the goal. And to your point, I think maybe there might be some idealism lurking behind the corner, as if that's even possible. But
yeah, no,
go for it. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, I think a great example. And so a few weeks ago, I did something called Professor Slam, where professors at UCSB have an opportunity to convey like their research or their scholarship interest in 3 minutes. And I talked about just how it's important for us to not be in echo chambers because we're vulnerable to what's known as the false consensus belief. We believe that more people think like ourselves than they really do, or like-minded than we really are. But what I talked about was the Defend the Police movement, and how that's a perfect example of idealism. Like it's just absolutely unrealistic to live in a world without police. And I can understand how that movement started and developed. But, what are you going to do? Who are we going to call upon? Are we going to call upon, community activists or organizers, which is what has been stated to do when there's a mass shooter at an elementary school? I think, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, there was a mass shooting event at Florida State University. That's where I completed my internship. Or at an elementary school. There have been mass shooting events every single year. So who are we going to call to, we need, sophisticated tactical teams to respond to those events, and their law enforcement. I just don't see how we can live in a world without law enforcement. Granted, they probably require more training, more understanding of mental health, but that I think is the perfect example, and is the Defend the Police movement too idealistic?
Yeah, I just assumed they weren't taking that seriously, and they were just trying to like poke the tiger in the cage, and just seemed like a marketing mistake. But if that's really the goal, it's like, like I'm all for reform. I'm all for like bringing better accountability. But when we start like talking about like trying to get the pie in the sky, the old kind of utopian mentality, it's like, whoa. This is not really helping us move the needle towards something, to use your word, reasonable.
Yes, and that's where, as you said, doing the harm that you can do when you're trying to do good. I think
Yeah.
it's what you said. So
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to your article. You reference an experience that a now tenured professor had while refusing to back down in the face of some protests that were happening at the school that she was teaching at. Could you give us a brief summary of that, just for our listeners, so that they can know what that situation you cited is, and why you think it matters for us to know about that?
yeah, so it's so important. I read her story in The Coddling of the American Mind, and so the authors talked about her experience. So at the time, she was an assistant professor, and she just talked about teaching a first year humanities course. And in that course, I think she referenced a lot of white scholars. And so some of the student protesters said that, she is reinforcing, white supremacy by teaching some of the fundamental beliefs or some of the perspectives of scholars who were white, and that somehow threatens the experiences of students of color in the classroom. And what it does is it looks at, all people of color as a monolith or like this special protected class who
Mm.
can't hear perspectives that are different. And none of these, scholars were, even had, were, had any like racist beliefs. They just so happen to be white, but you're not elevating or prioritizing the voices of underrepresented scholars who are, Black, Indigenous, or Latino or Latina. So, but it does such a disservice because we're going to exclude, we're going to again look at, you know, underrepresented people of color again as these vulnerable individuals who are too fragile to hear beliefs that go against their own. And even if you do hear a belief that's, racist, for example, reading, Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, or
Mm-hmm.
learning about kind of a flagrant white supremacist David Duke. I mean, I don't care. I mean, I am so privileged. I'm a tenured professor. It's not going to hurt me to read it. I don't agree with it, but we just do such a disservice by limiting, the viewpoints of the students whom we're teaching, or like, yeah, not being so, limiting again their perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. I mean, it's like the idea is that uh, the idea of sort of like banning people from thinking certain kinds of thoughts
Yeah.
or encountering new ideas, however awful they are, it feels a little bit like being told you can't travel to certain areas. You're not free to go to this place physically, and you're not free to go there mentally as well. And it
Mhm.
seems like if the experience in university is supposed to be anything, it's supposed to be that full freedom to go, like you said, with some guardrails in place, but with civility as a underlying premise, that you're free to go to any of these places and explore these things. And Joel and I have talked about before too, you don't combat a bad idea by shutting it down and censoring it. You combat like if you're wanting to combat a bad idea, it's because you think it's a bad argument. And in my estimation, based on my value set, if if uh if you're trying to combat a bad argument, the right thing to do is produce the right argument, the correct argument, so that the argument will win. But it seems like you're speaking to these things in the article, that a lot of trends in academia are trying to shut down the discussions that people really, really need to be having.
Yes, and it's absolutely right. Like these are the discussions, these are the conversations that we as faculty need to be having with each other, with our students, and for students to have them amongst each other, because we really do want to train and educate students who are free thinkers that ask questions. And a quote that came from the faculty members, that no one should have to pass your ideological purity test. Like it is okay to think outside the box, to think differently, and to disagree. Like that is the point. And that's something that I really try to get my students to do, is to provide a counter argument, even when it comes to anti-racism. Like I'm in the field of psychology that promotes it. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, however you look at it, with Trump's executive orders, that has been shut down significantly, which I don't agree with. Like I do agree in having, a full range of thought. Obviously, if you're not denigrating groups of people, but we do need to think about things creatively. And even though that there are aspects of DEI that I don't agree with, like I think it shows such a profound or massive overcorrection of
Mm.
issues. That's if that is what you believe, like that is fine. So it goes both ways on both sides of the political spectrum. And what I find is that people think in such extreme radical ways that we lose our objectivity. And that goes for both sides of the
Mm.
political and ideological spectrum.
Hmm. Wow.
What are Miriam? What are some of the practical things that you do in your classroom to promote fruitful discussion amongst your students?
Well, I start off like I created a course mission statement, and I know I was influenced by some professor somewhere by reading something. I think another course had it, but in my course, in the mission statement, which I go over at the start, is that you're going to be exposed to different views and beliefs, and this course values viewpoint diversity. And I state very explicitly that passions or topics or perspectives that you're passionate about will be respectfully challenged. And so I ask in my class, why do you believe
Mm.
what you believe? How did you develop this point of view? Have you held this belief since childhood? Who influenced you? And I'll provide like a
Mm.
different perspective of the topic. Like, for example, again, we have passionate beliefs about oil drilling, abortion. I mean, those are hot button topics, anti-racism. What are other topics? Whether or not, should there be minimum wage increases? But why do you believe that to be
Hmm.
true? And another excellent quote is, if you or your groups consider a topic to be um, obvious, ethically simple, or too taboo to question, questioning it is exactly what you must do. And so there are
Mm.
some issues that seem too simple to even question, like oil drilling. Now, I personally don't support it, but why don't I? I mean, it provides jobs for so many people who just don't have an opportunity to go to college, or same thing with coal mining. It does horrors for our environment. So it's just looking at it different ways and not being offended that someone else thinks this way. It doesn't mean that
Mm.
I want, wildlife to die. I'm a huge animal lover, but it's just getting people to think about things differently. Like that's all. And it's really such a basic minimum requirement of being in college or graduate school.
Mm.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about, as you're talking about that, and I'm going to steal one of your questions here, Trent. The
Yeah.
contrast between academic freedom during your student days and now. I'm just wondering if you've seen any shifts. I was a big fan of, I don't know if you heard the podcast series of The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling.
No, but I know the controversy she's
Yeah,
experiencing right now.
and it was such a powerful kind of story about how she came out with the Harry Potter books. It was the right that wanted to crucify her
know.
as this witch lover.
Yeah.
And then she starts talking about some of her views around feminism, and now the left wants to crucify her as this bigot. And it was so fascinating to watch. And I personally come from the perspective, spiritually speaking, that the only thing that can be offended is the ego. And so, like, when we're offended, there's usually some fear and insecurity that's fueling that. And it's just, and when I get offended, for me, I've learned to think, okay, Joel, what part of you is trying to be right rather than get it right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I love academia. I feel like when I was in seminary, that was a place where I had safety to explore ideas that even my denomination didn't support.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is it wishful thinking for me to hope that we as a society might become more concerned with finding the truth and less concerned with being offended?
Oh, I mean, we're people. So yeah, I'm just going to say it is wishful thinking. I hate to say
Oh,
that.
no.
No, we've definitely made progress. I have to be, I'm a realist over here. So, I mean, with a little bit of optimism. But I will say, my oh my, has the pendulum, shifted, or swung really. The pendulum has really swung from 10 years ago, over 10 years ago when I started graduate school in 2010 to now to 2025. I mean, that's 15 years. And so it really has. I mean, you would expect there to be significant change. And I think the big change is that which is a great thing to do, a lot more questioning by students. We have a very, very active and vocal student body. And I mean, college campuses have always been a place where students have been active and vocal. I mean, in the 1960s, people were protesting, students were protesting the Vietnam War. I mean, UC Berkeley,
Mm.
PAL is like the premier point for all of these activities. But I think it has, increased significantly. And the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, really talks about that, how there was kind of like a turning point, and we never kind of came back from that. I think around 2013, 2014, where things just became a little
Mm.
bit more extreme and the pendulum swung the other way. But growing up in, not growing up, but being in graduate school, I didn't experience, and I wasn't as vocal. I kind of kept my head down and I got my studies done. I supported social justice causes, but I wasn't really vocal. I wasn't holding my professor's feet to the fire, whereas I experience that now with students. And again, like, yes, be fervent and passionate, but it's more so where what I have observed, I think faculty, even tenured faculty, are timid around students and are really afraid to speak their mind. And,
Mm.
having tenure is a great thing. I mean, I can never get fired, and I don't have to be productive, which is nice. I mean, I will, but, um, but what can be harmed is my reputation, and someone could make my life a living hell. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
want that. Those are two things that could happen. Yes, I have, guaranteed income, and I have a very nice, retirement package waiting for me after I put in my time. But, there are real consequences of sharing your, honest to goodness point of view. And I will say, and I think this is everywhere, a lot of faculty have kind of found themselves in a corner. They're afraid to speak out. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I think, Joel, it's a little bit interesting because we didn't get into this in a previous podcast, but Joel and I had on a professor, professor emeritus, a lady named Laura Kipnis, who I don't know if you know her name, but she's a writer of quite a bit of nonfiction books and essays, and she was a professor at Northwestern for a lot of years, and she got into trouble for speaking very candidly on the on the topic of sexuality on campus or sexual ethics or whatever it was. And there were just massive, she like wrote an article and I forget where it was published, but um, a lot of students were protesting what she had to say. And ultimately, I don't know that she was fired, but I think that the university started kind of making it clear that they wanted her to sort of start inching away towards retirement and going off into the sunset and these kinds of things. And so we didn't really talk about that too much during our discussion with her, but having you on, having her on, that seems to be kind of a running theme. But I just want to reiterate, or I want to say to you that I hope that you do keep on doing that work. I was very thankful. Joel and I went to the same university, went to a Christian school called Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when I started as a freshman, I was in a much different place than when I graduated. I was still a Christian at the end of that time, but I was like a pretty diehard conservative. And I remember going to class, and it was actually, this is probably true at a lot of like Christian schools, is that your English department tends to be on the liberal side of things, and maybe it's because they're actually just reading widely on a lot of topics. But I just found that was the case at ORU and maybe some other Christian schools too. But it was during a freshman English class. The textbook that we had a compilation of short stories and essays and so forth. We read George Orwell's Politics of the English Language. We read, I think I read a short story. I think it was called Going to Meet the Man. I don't know if it was by James Baldwin or it was by Robert. Was it Robert Wright or something? Anyway, it was a story of a lynching. And there were just things I had not read, and I was being exposed to material that I'd never read before, and in an environment where we could ask good questions and have free discussion. In Christian campuses, that's not always encouraged, particularly there's certain topics you're not supposed to talk about. So all that to say, I was really thankful that I had some professors who were willing to go down that road. And I had a number of professors in my undergraduate and graduate program. And so I think the work that you're doing is very good. And I like what you said about how you practically put that into practice and the challenges that you make to your students and the way that you lead them towards searching in their past to sort of find the genesis of their own convictions and see where those can be challenged. I think that's really important. So that's an exciting work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. And it sounds like your English class truly accomplished its mission, is to expose you to different points of view that you've never heard of. Like that is the whole point, and to
Mm-hmm.
get you to think differently. And like you said, when you started, you were a different person from when you began than when you left.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's how I experience education too, as exposure. And I always say, like, when I know education is doing its work, I don't leave more arrogant. I leave more humble,
Mhm.
because the more I know, the more I realize I don't know, and there's too many rabbit trails to follow. So on our podcast, Miriam, we are huge fans of free speech. So you cite a quote from Evelyn Beatrice Hall that we both loved it. So would you please read that quote for our listeners and tell us more about why this is such an important idea for society today?
Yeah. So my favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes. So I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. It's just such an excellent quote, and it really should be like the mantra for academia. You're going to hear things that you hate, that you disagree with. I mean, like, don't we all? I mean, and that's life. But really, people should feel free to say it. Granted, there are so many like limitations, like hate speech is one of them. You know, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. So there's consequences to what you say. But if you share, you know, a particular belief system, for example, I don't believe, and this isn't necessarily my belief, but I don't believe in increases to minimum wage because it hurts small business owners, for example, then that's fine. It doesn't mean that you hate underrepresented people. Like I will notice people will make these like strong leaps. Like, no,
Right.
that's not what's being said. Like we're looking at a specific issue that is not meant to be generalized. So it's fine to have different beliefs or even controversial beliefs.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the nuances that we miss out on in our conversations are troubling to me when people create those generalizations. And it's again, I'm a former pastor. I see these things through the lens of
Yes.
spirituality, and I just see people trying again to bolster whatever those convictions, wherever they're born. They get hardened into a container in our early development, and that's where our kind of egos kind of go to. And it's scary to let go of our egos and to explore the uncertainty. And that's why I think you need skilled people to guide us into those spaces of education.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Again, people do have difficulty with the nuance. I mean, it's so easy for us, like because it requires critical thinking to see like the detail, and it's just so much easier to place someone in a category. I get it. But when we don't do that, then we think just so much more like simplistically, and we again fail to understand the heart of the issue, and we become vulnerable, or some people fall vulnerable to what's known as a straw man's fallacy. So if I say that, well, I don't think that, you know, minimum increases should be allowed because it hurts small business owners. Well, that means that you don't care about, you know, young parents or young families or people who can't find jobs. Like that'll be a leap, and like you're trying to make my argument go in your favor and to dilute or diminish what I'm saying. And we see that all the time in politics. It's such a old silly tactic that people do.
Yeah.
But it manipulates and distorts the reality. That is not at all what I'm saying. And so I just wish that we can have more productive dialogue, having more productive dialogue and trying to see the other person's point of view. It doesn't mean that you agree with it. In fact, the whole point is to disagree, and that's fine. So it means that you that you're thinking that it's a sign of, you know, that you're thinking in a healthy way.
In your article, but I don't know if in the article as well, in the discussion, you've mentioned the coddling of the American mind. I'm familiar with at least one of the authors, Jonathan Haidt. I haven't read that book, but I am somewhat familiar with some of his ideas. And then in your article, you also mentioned the work of Craig Frisbee. Do you want to say anything about either of those things, and or are there any other? Is there any other book that has really been influential in shaping your view on the topics that we're covering tonight?
Yes, Craig Frisbee. So I'm a school psychologist by training, and I would imagine, and I think Craig Frisbee is now a professor emeritus, I think at the University of Missouri, and I know that he has made waves in the field of school psychology
Mm,
for some of his beliefs that are discrepant from the field when it comes to multiculturalism and education. And he's a Black professor making statements about how we've gone too far when it comes to multiculturalism and diversity. And he has a book out that he edited alongside several other professors in psychology, just talking about the lack of ideological diversity in the field. That, let's
mm,
just say you're
mm.
conservative, that you're more likely to, experience, prejudice or discrimination. And I'm not here to say like, oh, you poor conservative person, but I'm just saying that there is such a lack of the political diversity. Like, you will never see a paper, or I would be surprised if you did, that is conservative in the field of school psychology or psychology in general. It skews so far left. And even if that reinforces your belief system, which feels so good, you're missing out a lot, because most of
Mm,
the people that we serve are not left thinking people. And so I think about rural areas like rural
mm,
Appalachia. We have school psychologists there. I'm just thinking about just some of the people that we serve and some of their values.
mm,
So
Hmm.
we just need to rethink some of the issues that we examine. So, but
mm.
I do wonder about Craig Frisbee and how he's been greeted with a lot of challenges in the field.
Mm,
Mm.
mm,
Wow.
Mhm.
I am very impressed with your perspective and how you have to hold on to the tension, I'm imagining, and your own lived experiences, what you've studied, your call to educate a myriad of people from a myriad of points of view. And so, Miriam, I just want to say thank you so much for standing in that space of tension and helping be a light. In my opinion, maybe won't lead us to a the idealistic utopia that some of us would like to happen, and I'm gonna have a hard time letting go of my wishful thinking. But how can I live in reality and still be a light? You seem to be one of those people.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry for, shutting your dream down.
I'll live.
He'll be all right, Miriam. I promise.
Okay, with that being said, Miriam, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Miriam.
Should we try to act like we're jumping back in? Oh, gosh. Silly Billy. Hey, guys. So, what a great conversation we got to have with Dr. Miriam Thompson. What you think, Trent?
Man, I was really impressed. I mean, first of all, I'll say I just really appreciate she has a very kind of calm, uh, you know, gentle, humble disposition.
Mm-hmm.
She's obviously a very intelligent person, poised, and I really appreciate the fact that she seems to have a wealth of information and experience, particularly on the topic that we're talking about, which was free speech in academia. Um, I really like how she had the courage to write the article that she wrote, and to write a strong article, not propaganda, but just a well thought through defense of increasing freedom of speech, and doing so in the right way. And I also I really, the moment in the interview that I really liked was when she talked about kind of the things that she does in a practical way to help
Mm-hmm.
promote free speech in her classrooms, and how she gets students to think about, to ask themselves, like, where do these ideas come from? Have you always believed this? And what might make you change your mind, and these kinds of things. And so it's nice to hear that that's happening in her classroom, and hopefully a growing number of classrooms in academia. So what about you, Joel? What was your kind of first impression of the interview?
Yeah, I was very impressed. Having read the article, I was already feeling like very optimistic about her perspectives, and for me, she kind of knocked it out of the park in terms of she kept talking about these ideas intelligently. She obviously has street cred, but it's not just what she was saying, it's how she was saying it. She said it with what, for lack of a better word, kindness. She wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel this argumentative or resentful energy in her words. I didn't feel like she was trying to persuade me. I didn't feel like she was using just rhetoric that you sometimes get from people in academia, where there's almost this subtext of like, what I'm saying is true, and if you disagree with me, you're an idiot. You don't get that from her. What you hear from her is just, hey, here's some of these dynamics.
Mm.
And she's inviting people into a space to consider and to think on their own, rather than telling them what to think. And so I think that's what education needs to do, especially when you get beyond high school. It's not just what you think, but how to think. And it feels like so many people are not interested. They'd rather just someone tell them what to think, and that way they don't ever have to like stretch that muscle in between their ears.
Yeah, I think something that occurred to me, Joel, as we were having this discussion with her is, and she mentioned the coddling of the American mind with Jonathan Haidt, and I'm familiar with some of his concepts. I think some of his concepts have to do with developing sort of like grit and
Grit.
mental
Yeah.
toughness and resilience. Those are habits and virtues that are required to engage in public discourse. They really are, in my view, to have a fruitful
Mm-hmm.
discourse. Is I have to be strong enough, willing enough to share my viewpoint, and then to shut up, and then to hear yours, and to take it in for what it is worth, to hear you sympathetically, and then to engage with you. And I don't know how widespread those values are, if they ever were widespread in our country.
Sure.
I don't know how. I suspect they're not super widespread today. But I like how you mentioned like her just kindness. She has this kindness, even though it's clearly referenced some of the viewpoints that she does have. So she does have viewpoints, but she's sharing those. And don't you think that one of the advantages of having studied and become a psychologist, this isn't true of all psychologists, but if you're a good psychologist, you do get pretty good at listening and
Mm-hmm.
understanding the value of listening and waiting and letting people tell you what's on their mind verbally and reading them nonverbally as well. And so we probably should listen to what psychologists have to say on a number of topics, but in particular, how to fruitfully listen to other people. That
Yeah.
is a sine qua non of good dialogue, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's always convicting for me because I'm trying to grow in my listening skills, and I feel like I'm making some headway. But now, in our conversation, I mentioned the ego a lot, and I have an ego, and it's sometimes I have to shush my ego up to say like, "Hey, we're not here to brag about what you know, ego. We're not here to constantly give unsolicited advice to people who never ask for your opinion." All right, I have to figure out how to like calm that insecure part of me down so that I can be fully present and really absorb what someone else is saying. And I get a sense that she's well practiced in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned the pluralism podcast to me a little bit ago before we hit record here. Where do you think it overlaps with that?
I think it overlaps in terms of sort of the habits and dispositions that are required for us to grow as humans and grow as a society. Like, I think in that book, William Connolly mentions a phrase, I might be missing this, but I understood it as agonistic respect, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that I have to agree with you. And it also doesn't mean I even really have to like you or like your opinions, but it
Mm-hmm.
means I'm willing to do business with you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to take what you're saying and give you the dignity of having a place to share what you have to say. because
Yeah.
I want that from other people too. It's a
Yeah.
simple golden rule thing. So I think thinking about free speech, academia, I think about the public square, and I think about how,
Yeah.
in order for us to fruitfully move forward, we've got to have people who are willing to have difficult conversations and willing to treat each other well, and admit from the outset that they could be wrong. And better yet, this is something I think that could be a growth opportunity for us as a society. Not only admit that we're wrong, but be able to identify what would disprove our argument, is to say,
Yeah.
if this were true, then these other things would be false, you
Yeah.
know. And too often I think arguments are just about feelings.
Yeah. They are. And unfalsifiable claims, as we talked
That's
about.
it.
People.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, God exists. God doesn't exist. No way to prove it either way.
I can't falsify that. I couldn't say yay or nay
Yeah.
to that. Michael Jordan, LeBron James, who's the GOAT? I don't. You have to tell me first what the GOAT means, and
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't even be able to falsify
Yeah,
that. So,
exactly. The part that still puts a little bit of a thorn in my side is her commitment to realism, and the wishful thinking
yes,
question, and I think just kind of our human desire for idealism. But I love that she called that out, because I've worked in a lot of nonprofit spaces and have had my experiences in like the social justice space, whether it's working with housing, whether it's working with mental health, whether it's working with just kind of like civil issues in urban environments. And you want there in it's I think it's just a part of us that we can see the ideal and we want to strive towards that. But she seems to be saying, I don't I don't think that's realistic. Yet she still has her convictions. So I
hmm
find that to be
hmm
interesting, that to have let go of the idealism, which I would classify as more adolescent thinking, yet still to hold on to convictions,
mm.
having let go of that, to me is mature and brave. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, like you asked me, I think in our pluralism discussion, like how would you describe your worldview, and I call myself a skeptical utopian. That
Mm-hmm.
I start with the utopian vision and work my
Yep.
way down from that, because I am now 46 years old. I'm skeptical of things.
Yep.
I've become more cynical, unfortunately, in my 40s than I thought I ever would. But so as an example, then defund the police.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the utopian vision? The utopian vision behind that is that wouldn't it be great to live in a world where there weren't corrupt police officers, that police were doing things for the right reasons, or even more utopian, that we didn't even have situations that police had to respond to. And then, but all of that sentiment and all of those feelings get wrapped up into something that sounds so exclusive,
Mm-hmm.
intellectually exclusive. Defund the police. It's so rigid. It's so harsh. It's
It
so
is. Yeah.
uncompromising. Like, well, what about? I mean, if you had to sloganize, increase adequate police training, uh, decrease overtime shifts,
Mm-hmm.
provide mental, whatever it would be. But I just this discussion by means of bumper stickers and slogans is not productive. Defund the
Yeah.
police. So you could have on one side defund the police, and the other side protect the blue or something. And
Yeah.
it's all about I want to be as far to the extreme of the thing that I
Mm-hmm.
can't stand. And it's like,
Yeah.
really, you really want to be in a situation where something happens, a car crash, a home invasion, and there's nobody to talk to. There's nobody to call except for
Yeah.
Bob down the street or something, you know. So
Yeah, you got one side that refuses to acknowledge that there are police officers who are noble and do wonderful jobs. And then you have another side that refuses to acknowledge that there are police officers who abuse the system and
yeah.
aren't held accountable for when they break their own rules. And so it's kind of like maddening to just watch it, and it almost creates a sense of me just want to not being a part of the conversation anymore, because
I know.
who can I talk to that will listen?
Yeah, right. So I'm hopeful that more professors will behave like Miriam Thompson, carry
Mm-hmm.
that torch, as you alluded to, shining the light, and continue doing that good work. So, yeah.
I have an idea just about academia or just education in general that I've thought about for a long time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's kind of I developed it from reading Richard Rohr, surprise, surprise, and he talks a lot about how we go through stages in life. There's the order phase, there's the disorder phase, and the reorder, and that these are just kind of things that we go through in life. And I kind of see it as like we're all born in a room. And this is more a metaphor of you get to know this room when you're a kid. No one gets to choose the room that they're born in. You're just thrust into that room, and you normalize quickly, because that's what we as human beings do. We find a way to adapt and survive.
Mm-hmm.
At some point in time, you discover a door in that room. Maybe this is in your adolescent years, maybe a little later. Depends on how sheltered you are. And through some circumstances, you go through that door for some reason or another. Maybe you're shoved through, or maybe you slowly just kind of peek your eyes out, and you find that there's a whole nother room of the same size, and immediately your world is doubled. And I classify that over time, as we discover all these doors in these rooms. Sometimes we go in that room, we find that room has doors. We go in another room, we find that room has doors. People generally have 3 reactions. And the first reaction I call to retreat to the old room, shut the door, and just be like, no, this is the world. All that other stuff is bad and evil and wrong.
Yep.
Or you reject the old room. You go into the new rooms, and these are great. That old room sucks. You shut the door on the old rooms and say that they're a bunch of hillbillies back there. We're here and enlightened. And then there's those that reconcile the rooms, that leave all the doors open that they enter, and they don't try to make any of them bad or wrong or better or worse. And I would say that conservatives get stuck in the retreat kind of mentality, retreat to the old room. Everything else is bad. This is true. Liberals get stuck in the reject the old room. They reject the old room and say, now we're all progressed. We've progressed now, and they poo-poo on the old stuff. But it's a small minority of people that figure out how to find that third way and leave all the doors open, and can actually be genuinely honest about the good and the bad of each room. What are your thoughts on that?
Not much I could add. I mean, I think that you have shared that idea, that metaphor with me before. I think it's fantastic. I guess my little addition to it would be, I think about in the field of like trauma, healing from trauma, is that of the concept of like integration. When thinking about dealing with like a childhood trauma, is you think about you do the work like in a clinical setting with the therapist, and the idea is not that you forget about that thing, but you integrate it into your experiences. Because I guess what happens with a lot of people with childhood trauma, or even just adulthood trauma they've experienced, is they get stuck in that place, and then it defines everything. It's the fulcrum. It's the center point of all of their lives, instead of just being unexperienced. That happened to me. That happened in the past. That is a part of who I am, amongst the many, many other things that are part of who I am. There's not a rejection of it. There's an embrace of that experience and the ability to move forward from it. So there's that from a psychological standpoint, and then from like an intellectual, ideological standpoint, is being able to kind of move in between rooms and integrate things and pull from it. Be able to say, no, that was there, because I think I read this, Joel. Maybe it was in Chesterton's. Did you read much Chesterton?
I did. Yeah.
In Chesterton's like Orthodoxy, it was in one of his books where he says something like, anytime that you are eager to tear down a fence, be sure to know why the fence was put there in the first place. It reminds me of like an instant rejection of conservative values. If a value is around for 2,000 years, it doesn't prove that it's correct. It does mean that you should tremble a little bit before you smash it, because what it means is that value has served humanity at a practical level for a long time. And so there's something there of value in it. I think your hot-headed young radical leftists who just want to smash everything forget that the value of some of these things that have been around.
Sure.
You know.
Yep.
So
absolutely. And that even if someone holds conservative views, doesn't mean that they aren't loving and open to other people. They may just be happy living in their rural small town, and they don't really need to have huge DEI understanding to operate lovingly in that community. And so I think there is a lot of people who don't spend enough time listening and empathizing with people beyond their own lived experiences. Yeah. Well, thank you, Miriam, for joining us. If you're listening to us, we really appreciate it. Trent, do you have any final words?
No, very thankful. Thought it was fantastic. Always appreciative when a guest is willing to take time to give of themselves and spend time with us and help us learn, help other people learn too.
So everyone, go to our website, www.leadballoonspod.com. You can email us at leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. You can let us know about some topics you'd like us to discuss. On our website, you'll see a lot of little links to the various platforms that this podcast is sent out to. iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts is where our audio is. You can go to our YouTube channel, Lead Balloons Podcast. Check out our lovely bearded faces. That's where you'll see us trying to jump in and out. We use a little bit of CGI and special effects when we did that, so it's pretty impressive.
Unreal.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.